Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we're going to be taking a look at an area called light projectors. So light projectors, kind of as it says on the tin, they project light, but they're not like a normal sort of light that we place in our scene. They allow us to actually project quite a complex structure with the light. So we associate a texture with them. So we could use this, for example, to project instructions on the screen, and it projects it on the surfaces in the environment. So it allows us to get some really nice effects there with this. Now, an important caveat with this, so light projectors are a supported system in the built-in pipeline. And it's the built-in pipeline that we'll be looking at these in. In the universal, previously known as the lightweight pipeline, they are not supported and there is not a current replacement for them. If you're looking at the high-def pipeline, so the light projector approach we're looking at isn't supported in that. However, there is a decal system that is supported in the high-def render pipeline. So depending upon which pipeline you're using, you may have access to the exact version that I'm showing, which is the built-in render pipeline, or there may be nothing in the case of universal, or it may be the decal system in the case of the high-def pipeline. So that's an important thing just to be aware of with this. So to begin with, we need to get access to the light projectors. So starting point for this is they're actually on the asset store. So it's there in the asset store. It's part of the standard assets pack. Now, the standard assets pack, this one hasn't been being updated since 2018. That's okay in terms of this being for a much older version of Unity, because there's only a very small component of it that we're needing. The majority of it we're actually not using. But so this is what we're looking for, the standard assets for Unity 2018. The newer versions, there's specific ones for like a first-person and third-person controller, but those aren't including typically stuff like the light projector. So we need to go to this older version to get access to that particular setup. So you need to grab it there from the asset store, and then the way we bring that in these days is via the package manager. So I've got that standard assets one selected, and I can go import. Now, when I go to import, it will give me an option for selecting what stuff I bring in. So what I would recommend to begin with is I just turn off everything, and then we grab the specific ones that we need. So we can get rid of all these ones, and what we're after is under effects. We can see, so we're not after the image effects or things like of that. What we're after is projectors. So this is the folder that we want to bring in. This will give us all of our light projectors, and it has a couple of prefabs, things like that. There's a couple of specific shaders in there as well, which is handy. And that's how it's based upon using a particular shader. And that covers all the key things that we need. There shouldn't be any other bits that we need, but it will, if there are bits that we've missed, it will definitely yell at us and get grumpy. I might also, not that we're really using them for this, but they do provide some handy little textures there, potentially, these light cookies. So let's import this. And because it's only a subset of stuff, it's pretty quick to import. So that is there and imported now. So in terms of how we use it, well, let's as a starting point, we'll take a look at the prefabs that we've got. So the projectors do come with a couple of prefabs. So let's bring in our grid projector prefab. And let's move this around, and we can see this here that's now appearing on the ground. If I turn this off, that is being projected by that light projector. And if I rotate this, we can see that grid moves, and importantly, it's being picked up on the particular objects, and because it's being projected, it behaves like something that's being projected. So we see kind of this bit of distortion that is happening with the sphere. We see the distortion that's happening here on the angles. So on the edges of that where it's on an angle. So that looks pretty cool. So that's one of the projectors that we've got. We've got this grid projector. So I'm going to turn that one off for now, and let's bring in a couple of other ones so we can see sort of the difference between them. So let's bring in this blob light projector. So this is just projecting a bit of light. Now, it is able to, and we need to be cautious, it can do stuff like this, where it's going through the particular item there, but that also could be a kind of useful thing in terms of the particular effect we're after. That could allow us to do something where we've got like a projector screen. That could work quite nicely with that. And the other one that we've got is we've got this shadow one. And if we take a look, it's projecting a shadow. So this is the thing, light projectors aren't just able to project light, they can also project a shadow, which is super handy. So if we turn these off and take a look and see what's different between these. So each one, the main difference is that material. We can see the other thing with the grid projector is orthographic was ticked. So if we take a look and see what changes with that, and this will be easier to see in this view. So orthographic is on. If we turn orthographic off, then we can see it's behaving more in it would be perspective in that case. So that's the kind of difference that we get with those. But the main difference is down to these materials. So if we take a look at these materials, you'll see they're using a different shader, and the key difference is that one where it's projecting a shadow is using this multiply one, whereas these other ones are using just the light projector one. So we can provide a texture, we can provide this sort of fall off setup. So let's create our own projector. So if we take a look at the key things, they've got this projector script on them. So we're going to create an empty game object in our scene, and we're going to call this image projector. And we'll just move this right into the center like that, so it's nice and easy for us then moving it back in a little bit. So there we go, we've got that positioned fairly well. I'll just snap these locations a little bit. So then we can add on our projector that we've got access to, and we can configure things like our near and far clip planes, field of view, aspect ratio, stuff like that. But the big thing we need is we need this material. So we're going to create a particular material here. So we go down to set up a material. So this is going to be image 1. And the shader, we're going to change that from standard. So we don't want the standard one, we want projector and we want light. So we've got our image projector set up, so we now get the frame range shown there, which is good. So that material, we're going to link up that material. So that material is there now. We can see it is having an effect, but at the moment that material doesn't have a texture applied to it. So first thing we're going to do is change that color. So you can see it's projecting pure white. Oops, that was the wrong one I changed. At the moment it's projecting pure white light. We could be changing, so this is just ambiently lighting up the scene, but we want to have a texture there. So I already set up this texture, and I'm going to change this so it's there as default. Now there are some key settings we do need to check with the textures, and if we take a look at our grid one, and we just want to compare, making sure that we've got matching settings. So that's generally looking about right. One of the things that we do want to make sure of is just that it's got the right settings, because that can really affect whether it's going to work or not. So with that, let's bring our texture into this. So we can select our texture. So in this case, I'm going to select this one. And so immediately we can see it's projecting it, but we can see it's looking a little bit odd, because if this was something where we wanted this to be projecting just on the wall here, you can see we're getting a lot of weird repetition there with that. So we can take a look at our texture settings. So we can do things here like, okay, wrap mode. What if we change that to clamp? And we can see with that, it's now, we get that sort of smearing at the edges, but that's because with this texture, I have the stuff at the edges there. So that's something where I could easily correct that with something like, one option would be that, set up a mask, and we'll just set up so that we, remember where I put the fill option, we can then set this up. So we've got a little bit of a mask in this, and that mask will just ensure that, like with that, we're only getting it in the, appearing in the center area there. Now with this, we want to make sure that the layer below that is black. So that looks good. Can save that. And if we now take a look, we just get that particular texture. So then we can bring this back if we need. So this can be a way, I've used this as a tool for projecting things like graffiti onto stuff before, which can be really handy, neat way of actually doing it. With that, we could also have it ignore particular layers if we wanted. We could switch this orthographic. We'd need to reduce that size quite a bit. And that can work quite nicely for avoiding distortion due to perspective, but we usually want a bit of distortion happening with perspective. Now, one of the things we notice with this is it's not particularly bright. That's something that's definitely a thing there, that this isn't particularly bright, in particular if we've got other lighting and stuff like that in the scene. So what we can do is we can actually modify the light projector shader. So if I go to projector light, and what I want to do is I want to actually give this an ability to ramp up the intensity. So how I can do that is I'm going to set up a new parameter here. So this is going to be intensity, and that is just going to be, we can set this up so it's just a float, and we'll give it an initial value of 1. So we'll just start it out in an intensity of 1, and then we'll go from there. So then down here, we have our intensity, and then for applying it, actually just chuck this in here, intensity. That'll allow us to ramp up the intensity of this quite a bit. So if I go to my materials and select that particular one, then we've now got our intensity setting, and as I ramp it up, you can see it will be applying to that particular one. Now we're getting a little bit of bleed over into our sphere and into the rest of the environment here. So that's something where we can start to use that layer setup. So what I would generally do in a case like that is say I only want it on the wall. Then I can add a layer. Vector target. Let's put our wall into the projector target one, and then our image projector, we're going to tell it to ignore everything first, and then we're just going to untick projector target. And we'll also fix that, the name is correct. So now it's just going to project on this. We will still get it coming through to the other side of that, but that's something where we could always, if we needed to particularly avoid that, we could separate this face here, or we could put in a quad there and have it be being projected on that quad. Now, a couple of things where this can go a little bit wrong is if we take our wall material, and at the moment we're using the standard shader. If we switch this over to, say, one of our unlit ones, then it'll still be working. So this can be a handy thing where normally with an unlit one, we wouldn't actually get lighting appearing on that. So light projectors allow you to apply light onto something that you wouldn't normally get light applied to. Same thing with shadows, because if we notice this, we don't get a shadow on this from that sphere, but if I turn on my blob shadow projector and we turn that onto our object there, and again if we switch this so it's only projecting onto the projected target, we can now have something where we can have an unlit material, but it's still getting lighting and shadowing applied to it, but it's getting it applied to it through this projector system. So that can be a handy tool there with this for being able to do that. Really, really useful. Means that you can sort of tweak the lighting and shadowing in your scene to a level that you might not otherwise be able to. Because there are times we do want stuff unlit in an environment, but we might want it unlit, but then it does have a little bit of a shadow. This allows us to do that. Or we could have a much more complex shadow, because my shadow projector, there's no reason I couldn't have that be projecting some text or some other image. So it's really handy for doing things like that. And we can test with other ones to make sure other ones behave okay for that. So our unlit one is behaving good. We can make sure in terms of, okay, well, what if we did one that had transparency with it? So the unlit transparent one is obviously wanting a texture there to it. And with that, we can see that it is not working with the light projectors. If we go back to our standard one and then change our rendering mode to transparent, we lose the light projectors. So even though there's no transparency set, we do lose our light projectors in that case. So that is something to be aware of, and we'll see that if we go for cutout, that will actually work okay. Fade and transparent, it's not going to actually work there with the light projectors. So that's something to be aware of with it, that if you've got your light projectors set up, and part of the reason I recommend using as a starting point, bringing in the standard assets section for it, is that gives you some known prefabs that you know should work. So you can bring them into your scene and test them to make sure that your setup is working okay, that the things you're trying to project it onto are actually picking that up and are going to be showing the lighting and the shadowing there. So use those prefabs just as a starting point, and then once you know that it's working, start actually modifying and customizing what's happening there with it. Because if you are finding cases where it is not coming through, that is likely down to being something that's an issue with the source material, so the material that the projector is being applied onto. And we can see also, if we take our wall, because, well, if we turn off receive shadows, we can see, again, it still works. So, and light projectors, so they are kind of bypassing a bunch of those systems, which again is really handy for stuff like this. And if we take a look at our shaders for it, shaders are reasonably straightforward. So the shaders for them are a basic fragment and vertex shader, and that's the case for both the light and multiply one, and they're quite simple. There's not too much logic with it. There's bits that you can tweak and change. The main area that you likely might end up needing to change stuff in is stuff like within the fragment shader, if you're wanting to do things like that intensity application there. So with this, I've shown projecting a texture on it, but this was a grayscale texture. Let's test and see if this works if we use a color texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, with this, set up another layer that I'm going to put below this. And this layer, I'm just going to pick a couple of colors, and I'm going to then apply a gradient across this. And then I'm going to set this layer so that it is, if we do a normal with that, bring this up here and do a multiply, then we've got colors coming through. So we'll save that and then we'll see. And we are getting some of that color coming through. Now we're obviously projecting onto a surface that's currently blue. So if we make this surface more of a dark color, so we're able to get the actual colors coming through, we can see we do have those red and green colors coming through. And we'll notice if we take our projector and up the intensity for it, we can more clearly see those colors. So we can have colors there in those light projectors, which is great. Let's also see what happens if we project the same thing with slightly offset ones. We can see that works okay, and it kind of works how we would expect, that areas where the same thing is being projected multiple times, we do get additional brightness there with it. Which is good. That's what we are kind of wanting and expecting to see happen, which is great that it's actually behaving like that. And if I move the shadow one over into it, that also is generally applying fairly well. And so you could get some quite unique and interesting effects with this by projecting multiple different images that are slightly offset. You could be setting up puzzles in, for example, in a game where you might be having different sections of colored images that are being projected and rotated and things like that. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can be doing with these light projectors. So absolutely experiment with them, see the kinds of things that you can set up. Now, we've looked at a few of the settings. We haven't really messed with this fall off one though. So if we take a look and see, we'll get our grid one back. Actually, we'll use the light, blob light one for this. So our blob light one, and I'm going to change this so it's pointing directly down again. So this one, if we take a look at its material, so it's using a light projector, and it does have a fall off set up for it. So let's first remove that fall off and see if we see any change. So we do see a change there in that it gets actually dimmer. So, okay, let's take our blob light projector one. And at the moment, it's about 2 off the ground. So let's raise that up to 20. So quite bright, projecting across a large area. If we take a look at the material for it, so our light projector, and again, if we remove this, we get a bit of a change here. So let's keep with our projector and let's start just raising this. And so there, at this point, we start to notice it fading out. And that makes sense because we have this clip plane. So if I bring this back down to 10, we can see it fairly clearly. My clip plane, if I reduce this, see how it's fading? That's because that fall off is happening over the distance of the clip plane. And as soon as the clip plane is in front of what we're projecting on, we no longer see it. So these near and far clip planes are controlling the range. So in terms of the distance from the camera, where that light projector is able to have effect, and that fall off applies over that range. That's why if we take a look at our fall off texture, it's a grayscale image that goes from fully white, so that's at the point closest to the camera at the near clip plane, to fully black. So we would be able to adjust this to control how that fall off happens over distance. So that's a really handy thing that we could be experimenting with there with that. In terms of other changes, if we look at the aspect ratio, so 1 is what this is currently set to, and whatever I change that to is going to change the aspect ratio of what it's projecting. So handy way if we needed to project something that is a different aspect ratio, we can set our aspect ratio there, and that's going to work quite nicely to ensure we get the particular effect we're after. And these are all things we can change while it's actually running, which is really handy. So those are the key things with the light projectors. They're quite simple to set up. The main things that we need to remember is I do recommend grabbing the setup from the asset store because that gives you those shaders to begin with. With those shaders, I do recommend modifying the light projector one so that you can add in an intensity. I do find that that is often necessary. And then with those, when you're working with your textures, if you're not wanting it to repeat, then as we did, we can see the light one is already using clamp, and that's what we generally want. With the grid one didn't, because the grid one is repeating over a range. So typically with your projector textures, you do want to make sure that you're setting that wrap mode based upon how you're using it. If you're wanting it to be repeated, then absolutely leave it on the default of repeat. If you're not, then set it to clamp and make sure that you're controlling what the colors of the pixels are at the edges there. So you want to make sure that there is a border of black pixels around the edge of your texture. Otherwise, if you have colored pixels at the edge, then those, whatever colors you have there on that edge will get stretched and smeared across all of the surface that it's being projected on. So do set it to clamp for if you're not needing that to be happening. And the other key sort of things to be remembering there is the material that you're projecting on. If you are not seeing it actually appear, it may be a case that there are settings in terms of the shader that is not set correctly, so that the light projectors are actually rendering after the images are already there, and so the information is not getting picked up. And the other key thing with the light projectors is we can use them to provide light and shadow to something that does not support light and shadow. So something that says it doesn't receive shadows, if it's got a light projector with multiply set on it, it will still actually have a shadow then. So we can get some really nice effects there by having something that is unlit, but we can still give it a shadow to make it, because shadows help sort of have something feel like it is properly there in the environment, that it's integrated to it. So this is something that can be a really cool way of adding that in. Our light projectors can overlap as well, and we get increase in intensity in cases like of that. And we can also, as a final thing, if we take a look with our light projectors, if we try rotating, so rotating around X, yep, that tilts it, that's what we'd expect. What if we rotate around Z? Well, it rotates. So really handy if you want to have something projected and then you could be rotating it. Lots of cool effects you could be doing there with this. So dive on in and experiment with it, see some of the cool things that you can be creating with it. So I hope you found the video helpful, folks. If you are looking for the code for the project, the full code is available up on GitHub, and the link for that is in the description below. That code, you're freely available to use that for any of your own projects, whether those are commercial or non-commercial ones. So dive on in and make use of it. If you've got any questions, then feel free to chuck in a comment below. And if you found the video helpful, please do chuck in a like and subscribe. It really does help out. If you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and the link to that is also in the description below. Bye!